But look, thank you all very much and welcome back in day 3. And, like for those who've been around, we've been talking about the microbiology. And of course, we started off with the microbiology of, the Earth, the whole planetary thing, but particularly the microbiology of water and clouds and how nature has evolved this exquisitely beautiful balance between hazes and clouds. And basically in that, nature can regulate the whole cooling and hydrology of the planet. So yes, the first day was all about, the question of that climate story. Yesterday we focused actually on the basis of that, the Earth soil carbon sponge. How do we actually build that sponge? Because that sponge is critical to provide the water for the transpiration, the hazes and the clouds. So the carbon and the water, they're all integrated together, and we'll talk a little bit more briefly about that. But today actually we wanted to come from the planetary to the Earth, but really we now want to talk about your existential intimate self-interest, because we now want to talk about your health and the nutritional integrity of the food you eat, which depends on these healthy soils. So how does healthy soils provide us with healthy food that enables us to be healthy people? And really that whole bridge, in terms of our own biochemistry and health, to see, okay, what is it about soils, food, and our health that in a sense we have to manage. And it's critical, we'll come into that in more detail later, because we've got some very, very serious self-induced health problems. And quite frankly, if we don't fix those, we don't need to fix the climate, because we won't be around long enough to worry about the climate. Okay, so we've got a climate situation, we've got a Earth carbon regeneration situation, and then of course this whole question of our preventative health. So today is then that focus on healthy people need healthy food from healthy soils, and in a sense, how does the microbiology done that? Yesterday, there may be some questions during the day about, okay, here's how do we build that soil carbon sponge, the microbiology of carbon drawdown, how basically the microbes have been so critical in actually taking that photosynthate, putting it into humates, into glomalin. What we went through the ABC of that sort of soil microbial ecology, that carbon sequestration process. But during the day, if there's any further questions that you've been worrying about at night or something's not clear, we can cover that again. Okay, well, let's go back to the basics. About 4.6 billion years ago, roughly where you were sitting, there was a supernova, right? It was basically a hydrogen explosion, because our former sun just exploded. And it cast off a big cloud of hydrogen, which formed our current sun, and also sort of produced a lot of stardust, because that explosion, as it explodes out, massive release of energy. And of course, as that energy collapses back in, it basically created 96 natural elements, which is the elements in our periodic table. And they were scattered throughout that solar system as detritus, stardust. And that stardust collected and condensed to form these 9 planets, but we've written off Pluto, so there's only 8 of them. But that's just us, it's still there, it's just that we haven't deemed it to be a planet because it doesn't meet our criteria. Bureaucracy, come on, it works well. Anyway, so basically stardust formed the planet. And this planet Earth has about 0.2% carbon in its whole elemental composition. Okay? And most of it is iron and aluminium and silicon and oxygen, right? That's the biggest weighing components, and 0.2% carbon. So this carbon is a building block of all life. And as we've been hearing, it's a building block of, that whole, life form, and then all those dynamics that we've talked about. And it's pretty fundamental. It goes in all these different forms and just cycles and dynamically moves in all those different forms, right? It started off, when the Earth was all really molten magma, that most of the carbon was in the atmosphere as methane, carbon and 4 hydrogens, some carbon monoxide because there wasn't that much oxygen around, some carbon dioxide, and some, basically VOCs, volatile organic carbon compounds, things that joined up. But it was basically in the atmosphere. And over the last, basically, again, since life evolved, we'll come back to that later, it's been drawn down initially by the corals to form these calcium carbonate, millions of billions of tons of carbon deposit. And then when basically photosynthesis started, it started getting formed into these carbon compounds we've talked about. So look, there's carbon in the planetary thing, 0.2% of this planet, but it's fundamental as a building block of life, and that dynamics is fundamental. And again, in the quantities, most of it is in coral or limestone, like formed from that. The next biggest sink is the oceans, 38,000 billion tons. There's about 5,000 tons in our fossil fuels, 5,000 billion tons. There's about 2.5 thousand billion tons in our soils. There's another 10,000 billion tons in our methane hydrates, which are actually sitting on the ocean floors and could bubble up as methane, and that would destroy us all very quickly. And it's really, managing that dynamics, that cycle, which is really what we're talking about with the carbon cycle. Yeah?
Could you just write down the amount of carbon in the ocean versus on land?
Yeah, okay, well look, it's very important. I mean, okay, so basically there's millions of billions of tons of carbon as calcium carbonate, as corals, right? So, I mean, we don't know exactly, but it's monstrous because we don't know how deep all the limestone and sediments are. But that's the biggest one. There's 38,000 billion tons carbon in our oceans. Okay?
And that's not including the coral?
No, this is additional to, plus, right? And there's basically about 5,000 billion tons carbon that we've basically put into our fossil fuels. That's our coal, brown coal, gases and oils, right? And that's all been done by life. This is just simply a chemical absorption. This is, we should make a point here. This was basically a living thing that was done by life. And of course, this was done by life, fossil fuels. Okay, we've got about 10,000 billion tons carbon in our methane hydrates. Now, these are sort of ice, frozen methane in the deep, cold oceans. And we're not sure how much of that was biological, but some of it definitely is, we know that. So some of it might have been geological, but others is sort of like from sediments that have gone down there, right?
How did that form? How did hydrates form?
Okay, so methane, it's so carbon sort of basically being reduced in a low oxygen environment as it does inside a rumen. But because it's in those deep oceans, then it's so cold and the pressure's so high that it more or less doesn't bubble up, but it's locked into an ice lattice. But if the ocean's warm, as they are, and we're getting massive amounts of this in the Arctic Ocean now, this will bubble up. Sorry?
It was a function of cold.
A function of cold that keeps it there,
right.
But it was produced in the same process as inside a rumen. It's a reduction in that, right? We've got about 4,000 billion tons of carbon as well in peat, and that's of course the tundras where, Canada and stuff we know, so there's the peat, and that's all biological. We've got 2,500 billion tons of carbon in soils, and that's all basically biological, although there's some limestone, but that limestone is biological as well, so there's some soil. Okay, and so then we've got 750 billion tons of carbon in forest or in green. Okay, that's green photosynthetic matter. Okay, that's of course biological.
That's heavily
Is it more
forest.
than that? That looks like what's in the atmosphere. Is it the same?
Yeah, it's roughly the same. And then we've got 750 billion tons, which is in the air as CO2. Okay? And of course, most of that isn't biological, but it's been cycled biologically because it's gone through exactly what you talked about all that time, right?
And how about in life? How about in living?
Okay, the amount in living thing, that's really incorporated in the soils and in the biomass, you know, the forests. Now, sure, there's animals, herbivores that are containing life. Actually, I haven't got an exact figure, but it's only a small percentage of, you know.
And does soils include living things that are in the
Yeah,
soil?
the 2,500 includes that microbiota, you know, like the
So it's
carbon
not
in
just
living.
stable, yeah, okay.
No, it's not just the, yeah, because all the carbon isn't in mineral, it's carbon is in that organic matter living soil. The soils are important because actually in this whole balance it's important because as we sort of said, okay, no, I'll do it at the side. There's 13.9 billion hectares of land on this planet, and basically previously 10,000 years ago, this is UNEP figures, so they've had long discussions, agreement on it, there was basically 8 billion hectares of primary forest and about 5 billion hectares of rangeland, grassland, savanna, right? So this is forest and this is savanna. And then there was about 0.9 billion hectares of mountains and, you know, basically exposed rocks and stuff like that.
Sorry, could you say those last two numbers again? Just about the forest.
Okay?
Those are current? Or
No,
those-
10,000 years ago, basically there was this total of 13.9 billion hectares of land, 8 billion hectares of primary forest, and 5 billion hectares of grassland, rangeland, savannas, right? And about 0.9, which was then mountains and rocks and, you know, sort of basically exposed things. And what we've done in the last 10,000 years, we have basically cut, and this is now minus, we've taken 6.3 billion hectares of forest and we've cut them and burnt them and what have you. But instead of just having 1.7, some has regrown. So now globally we've got 3.5 billion hectares of forest, some, well, 1.7 primary, Amazon and stuff, and about 1.8 billion hectares of secondary regrowth forest, as the New England system is. Okay, so we've done that. This 5 billion hectares of grassland, rangeland, we've generally turned that into 5 billion hectares of man-made desert and wasteland, and that's the Sahara, Tibet, Turkey, Iran, Iraq, North Africa, you know, it goes on and on and on. And of the residual here, you know, like obviously there's 3.5, we've turned a lot of that into about 5 billion hectares of, again, rangelands, and of that 1.5 billion hectares of cropland. Okay, so in a sense, this is what we are actively farming. Okay, about 5 to 5.5 billion hectares, 1.5 of which is cropland, and the rest is basically grazing, pasture lands, right? So yeah, that's in a sense what we've done. And why I mention this is that soils, yeah, they used to basically probably have, we don't know for sure, but back here they might have had 5 to 7,000 billion tons of carbon in that soil, in that sponge, before we did all this oxidation. Okay?
Is this all on Healthy Soils Australia?
Yeah, well, we mentioned it, but look, it's yeah, okay, if you go to the United Nations, you know, soils, I mean, all this data is, you know, totally.
I
Yeah.
generally refer to slightly different numbers, but
Yeah.
basically the same order.
Yeah.
it depends on when the data was taken. Because
Sure, and it's what's
adjusting.
where they draw the lines
But
between in and out. Yeah,
There's a chart that NASA puts out that I kind of keep. It's under the carbon cycle. If you look NASA carbon cycle, you will find a page that has this chart on it, and it describes the fluxes and the sinks, and the sinks are what you're talking about here. And so it talks about deep ocean and fossil pools and in deep soils and all that kind of stuff, but roughly the same numbers.
yeah,
So it's an easy chart, and it shows you the whole carbon cycle, not just fossil emissions, which is what climate people talk about, but this whole cycle.
yeah. And just as
I'll put it over here.
yeah, and just as we don't know exactly how many millions of billions of tons of carbon are locked up in this, we also, of course, don't know exactly how many in these guys. But humans keep on looking for them, right?
Walter, was
Diamonds, yeah.
all 5.6 billion, is it billion or million?
But this is all billion. This is all billion.
Billion.
Yeah.
Hectares of desert, that is all a result of human
Yes.
activity?
Yes.
They're
Well, hang on. There were some deserts back here, 8, 5, and 0.9. Some of that 0.9 were, obviously.
0.9 was
So
desert.
Death Valley would have been a desert, and there's other, Atacama Desert was a desert, right? But then again, Atacama Desert had Antofagasta behind it, had Peropsis forest growing in it as well, because they were harvesting rain from fog, as we're saying, hey, California might want to do. But the point is that we have massively increased, this 5 billion hectares, we should take full credit for that,
That's amazing.
Peter.
So, Walter, the 13.9 billion hectares that you've named as the total, the denominator here, excludes the areas of permanent ice field on the planet?
Yes,
Antarctica,
yes,
Greenland?
this is the ice-free land, but we've got this new dynamic coming into because we're melting now some of that area, although we won't be exposing that much land because most of it is water that'll heat the earth further, the Arctic. And of course, a lot of this is going to go under sea level rise. So how much of your 6 billion hectares of alluvial, productive agricultural land, depending how long you want to wait and how fast sea level rises because of melting ice, how much of that we're going to lose to sea level rise. Well, we can do predictions, right? But we don't know for sure. But it makes the point that we started off on Wednesday, hey, we've got to cool this planet. We've got to so much try to use this hydrological cycle we talked about on Wednesday to basically stabilize, offset that warming effect, because it now is the only way that we can actually cool this planet. We've got all the quantity here. This is actually important to highlight. We've got all these quantities, and so we've been talking about on Wednesday that we've got to draw down 20 billion tons of carbon per annum to offset the 10 billion tons a year that our fossil fuel use is putting into the air, and to draw down another 10 billion tons of legacy carbon. The legacy carbon that we've been putting up for the last 250 years. And you can see in comparison to all these figures, this is, modest. Actually, I should say here, we're putting a lot of data on here. Every year the planet fixes, green stuff on the planet fixes 120 billion tons of carbon per annum. So that's the sort of current photosynthetic capacity of the Earth. Half of this is in the ocean, half on land. But because, as you can see, what we've done to the land and how much we've degraded that, we might be operating at half. The current photosynthetic capacity of the planet might be half of what it was 10,000 years ago under an optimal soil condition. So, in putting it in context, that's what we've got to do. That's the target, in a sense, humanity has over the next, as quickly as possible, and then on for centuries. I'll explain that in a second. That's, in a sense, what nature can, as a residual, can do, but nature previously did twice as much of that. So it's a tall ask. We might be looking at a 20-30% increase on terrestrial carbon fixing, but there's no reason why we can't achieve it. There's no reason why nature can achieve it. We're going to have to do this for several centuries, because what happens as we draw down carbon, we draw down that 20 billion tonnes, we've got 38,000 billion tonnes in the ocean, and the oceans will say, thank you, I can now re-equilibrate some of this back into the air. So no matter how much we draw down there, the air isn't going to change rapidly, because the oceans will keep on re-equilibrating, putting more carbon back into the air. This is now a super saturated, carbon sink, and as we take more carbon out of the air, it will just return some. And of course, as the oceans acidify and warm, the danger is it'll dump big quantities of carbon back into this anyway.
Where's that trigger point? What's the temperature? How much?
Yeah, very, very good questions. You really want to ask her, don't you? Because you've got to go back to beyond my pay grade. I don't know. But look, it's happening now, right? As the oceans warm, 93% of the additional heat on this planet is getting absorbed by the world's oceans. So as they warm, and as we put more CO2 in the air, they're acidifying, and both of them are going to sort of be actually triggering more carbon coming out of the oceans back into the air. And so really, the only thing we can do is, isn't that what nature did? We can say, look, no, we can cool the planet hydrologically, through clouds and all the processes we talked about on Wednesday. We can do that safely, naturally, very speedily, within days. I mean, a cloud comes over and you take your jumper out within minutes, right? So it's a cooling effect within minutes. And we can do that, we can help nature induce that, and that will offset the warming, and in a sense, that's all we've got left now, right? Okay, so look, actually it's explored further, because we weren't going to talk about carbon. Well, we were, but this is, and I hope it's sort of helped, because that's perhaps put a framework on that global challenge, but also, in a sense, here we are on soils. And of course, actually, that's the other thing, okay, thank you, that's the other most important thing to say. We, Homo hubris, Homo sapien, have got only one point of leverage in this system, right? And that is these soils, right? So these things are particularly important, because we can't do anything directly to the oceans, we can't do anything directly to the corals at that scale, but we can, in our management of our soils, fundamentally change this.
And in forests.
But the forests can't happen without the soils, you see? So these are the green pumps that are dependent on the water, the sponge in our soils, right? So it's our management of our soils, putting carbon, restoring that soil carbon sponge, that is our only lever of agency that we have to rebuild forests, but also to rebuild the hydrology to give the cooling. Sorry.
Yeah, can I, just on this theme, and I know that a lot of us, have been listening to all this and thinking how important it is to get the word out about the understanding of how to work with the water cycle to cool the planet, how to build the carbon sponge to help the water cycle. So that's a big theme of my book, which is out there, Water in Plain Sight, Hope for a Thirsty World. And just yesterday, an excerpt, a pretty significant excerpt of the book, posted in a magazine, an online magazine called craftsmanship.net. And it features Walter's work. It's based, it uses the Australia story to get into the material. And then there's a list of resources in a sidebar that includes the Soil Carbon Coalition and some other groups, and Biodiversity for Livable Climate, and Healthy Soils Australia.
Yeah.
So it's a succinct way of conveying some of this material.
Yeah.
to our networks.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
What's
No.
the site again, Pete?
craftsmanship.net.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
the lead story, and it's a nice magazine,
Yeah.
actually.
And actually, thank you, Judith, and actually Elizabeth may wish to comment. But in a sense, you know, congratulations all round. You should give yourself an applause because nobody now in serious policy circle disputes, you know, this reality and the critical role of these natural biosystems, regeneration, and soils as a vehicle for doing that. So all over the world, you know, the whole political policy environment has accepted that, yep, okay, we have to engage that regeneration thing. So this 10 years of advocacy and information and communication, you know, that you guys have been leading and pioneering, in a sense, yeah, it's agreed. And so the words are accepted, the logic's accepted, but now the challenge for us is the actual action, right? How do we turn that political agreement into grassroots just doing it? And this comes to, yeah, hectares on hectares. It's a thing that you're doing in Canada, right? How do we actually extend these innovative, you know, carbon drawdown ecologies, but also in urban agriculture? You know, how do we actually sort of say, look, here are most of the people living, you know, in cities. How do they have agencies? How do they get this understanding? Because it really is it's still going to be us at the community, grassroots, farmer level that in a sense drive the actual implementation. Policy will follow. But you mustn't sort of ever delude yourself that you can wait for policy to take ownership and drive the change. We've been there for 50 years. We don't have another 50 years.
Take longer than that.
You want to... No, but please, come in. Sorry?
Just teasing you.
No, but I mean, I think it's an important debate and discussion, and obviously they go hand in glove. And in a sense, what we came to talk at the end yesterday, you know, this COP21, the whole concept of zero net emissions, soil wasn't mentioned overtly, but it was absolutely there covertly in that little word net, because it's a soil drawdown capacity. Remember, we had Charles Keeling, and we basically now accepted that drawdown potential of biosystems, not just the emissions, were fundamental if we're going to ever address this climate, the water, the food imperatives that humanity is facing. And so that's fully accepted. 197 nations have signed on and committed to that. And now the real issue is how do we implement this practical grassroots drawdown action? And as we were saying yesterday afternoon, how do we get farmers to be paid for it so that there's the incentive, the momentum to keep that going? But Elizabeth, do you have any things to say on that?
No, not just at the moment. I'm really sorry. I'm editing a press release.
Oh, okay. No, sorry. Okay, yeah.
I'm trying to fit in.
No, understand. But if we say something that's nasty or controversial, you know, stick up for it.
On the policy note, I think one of the things that I'm just starting to learn, but there are other people in this room who already know it well, you, Sherry, Elizabeth, and various other people, that all of these people who we kind of depend on to set or change or carry out policy are just other human beings
Yes.
who have busy lives. They have
Yes.
children
Yeah.
asking for more breakfast cereal in the
Yeah.
morning.
Yeah.
They have limited reading time.
Yeah.
They have, voicemail full of messages.
No
But they're
staff.
also, what?
No staff to help them
Often
sort
no
through all that.
staff to help them. And they respond just to all the same emotional things
Totally.
that we do. They like to be with people who
Yeah,
like them.
yeah.
They like support and appreciation. They form relationships just like any other human.
Absolutely.
You can call them, as Walter and I did with Bernie Sanders' environmental team, and set up a
Yeah.
breakfast meeting
Yeah.
here tomorrow morning.
Yes.
They're just people.
Yes.
And there are a lot of people in this room who have experience working with
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
And that's part of our afternoon, is that
Yeah.
we have some real resources here from a lot of different
Yeah.
ways. And so the same thing is true of
Yeah.
big industrial farmers or
Yeah.
people who work for Monsanto or people who run for president, that they're all human
Yeah,
beings.
yeah.
They're all good people doing the best they can
Yeah.
with the information, the support,
Yeah.
the cultural background, the personal history.
It's a
they
really
came
important
from.
point to just communicate to them as a human being and not vilify
No,
and
no.
assume that just because they wear a different color label that they won't listen to you, because that's not true.
Yeah, and certainly, again, fully support what Dee Dee said. I mean, because in Australia, we're very privileged because we've got this connection with our ex-Governor General, Michael Jeffrey. And yeah, no, we talk to the Prime Minister, we talk to everybody, anybody, and we do. And yeah, there's no argument about any of this, right? They say, yeah, go for it, Hey, we need to be doing more of that. But they're just words, you see. And so I agree that they're just people, they're passionately involved with it as well. They want to see it for their children, for their whole futures. But again, the action is still on the ground with us, grassroots, community, farmers, urban agriculture, doing it, right?
I think Peter Donovan and I were talking this morning, and he made a good point that the grassroots really pulls the policymakers. The policymakers don't like to get out in front
Yes.
of what they see that people want. So just in thinking that this grassroots is really important to pull the policymakers.
Yes.
Otherwise, you can make policy, but it's going to be resisted or cast aside or ignored.
Yeah. Or it's absolutely genuine vision and direction, but nothing happens, right?
I know from experience in doing political work in my area on other kinds of things, that the vast majority of politicians who are elected to office know very, very, very little about most issues,
Mm-hmm.
and that they have to be educated.
Mm-hmm.
And I've learned this through a friend of mine who is dealing with prison reform in Massachusetts. She's retired now from the Federal Reserve, and her full-time 50-hour-a-week job, free of charge, has become educating politicians in Massachusetts about what a failure the jail
System.
judge system is. And she said it's astounding how little they know.
Yeah.
And that's something that people think they know something about. This is a subject that most people don't know anything about.
Okay.
Right? And so it's just mind-boggling, So we have to educate the people who are going to do the legislation and policy making and so forth, because they really are out to lunch.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And in a sense, it's a wonderful segue, okay? Because now we're basically getting into this. Okay, so we've now basically said there's the Earth, there's a planetary thing that we talked about on Wednesday. Yesterday we talked about, the soil, the carbon in the soil at the biosystem level. So today, I hope I've done justice,
Missing the four-legged critters.
Oh, yeah, that's it. But okay, so today let's bring it down to exactly what Dee Dee sort of said. Look, these are people, they're all basically passionate about their kids and their future and their societies and their communities. Genuine. And so how do we bring this whole message down to the individual? Okay, and so we've been talking about planetary health, we've been talking about cooling and the whole planetary stability and health. We've been talking about biosystem health and biosystem dynamics, and our exercise this morning was all about, the process there. So today we want to actually go down to this personal health, or the personal sort of values and health, but we will go even down further. We'll go down to that little cell, okay? And we'll really go to that little cell to say, well, what is the actual driving force and compelling imperative why this is so critical, not just planetary, not just ecosystem, but at this individual level. And it all revolves around whether we live or die. Simple, right? Existential imperatives, absolutes. And we live or die depending on, our health. Okay, so it's all about this issue of our health. And we've got a vested self-interest in our health and that of our children, right? And Linus Pauling, 50 years ago, 4 Nobel Prizes, made a very, very simple, absolute biochemical, absolute statement that, look, 90% of our nutrition, our preventative health, our health, is governed by what we eat. It's governed by what we put into our face. It's governed by the nutritional integrity of the food we eat. Okay? And so it's that nutritional health of the food that we eat that is fundamentally biochemically linked to our health. And in a sense, we're going to discuss the thing that healthy people need healthy food from healthy soils. And if we can make that case, in terms of the education, the narrative, and we can, it's fully scientifically substantiated, we'll go through that. If we can make that case, then basically every living human being on this planet has a vested buy-in. Who was talking about buy-in? Tim, weren't you? Vested buy-in?
I use that term, yeah.
Yeah, vested buy-in in healthy soils, because it's only healthy soils that can give us healthy food, that can give us healthy people. So they need these 33 plus essential nutrients in the right concentration, right forms, right ratios, right balances at the right time. Something that's toxic in an embryo stage is needed at the next stage, and it's toxic again in the next stage. So it's a very sophisticated requirement. And those nutrients, as we've talked about all along, have to come from stardust. That stardust that's in our soils. Because it's that stardust, that mineral nutrient that was fixed as the elements in that Big Bang, well, not the Big Bang, sorry, the supernova.
So I don't know if people know it, but the original formation of the star comes from hydrogen and oxygen and doesn't have any heavy...
No, and it doesn't have any elements at all, just hydrogen, oxygen,
It just has 2 things.
Yeah.
And it has to go through a cycle and blow up.
And what it does, how it makes these elements, we're not absolutely certain of this, of course, we don't know everything. But the point is that, no, you get this big explosion, and then all the energy that went into the explosion gets collapsed, all the electrons, protons, neutrons then collapse down, and that energy is captured then in the radio, isotope, the radioactivity of each element. So if we explode that element, as we do in a nuclear explosion, we release all that energy again. Okay, and so really forming these elements is really condensed energy, right? And so there's protons, electrons, neutrons, but they're all compressed, and all the energy of that supernova is represented in the periodic table in, those elements that make up the Earth. But why did we go there? No, okay. Okay. But what we're talking about, these same elements, those essential elements, 33 plus, there's about 52 actually used in biology, but we don't know what some of them do or whether they're essential. But certainly we know 33 are plus, and they're then fundamental, because that's the only place we can get those nutrients is from the earth, from the soil, from that stardust, right? Okay, so that's the key thing. And obviously in the Green Revolution that I was then a young scientist in, we had to increase food production because we're going up from the 3 billion people, and people are hungry and they need more food. And we're very, very successful in doing that. We sort of basically have increased food productivity through our industrial agriculture enormously. Overall about 150% increased yield outputs per person. In some countries, parts of China, they were doing 500% increase in productivity. But that was at a cost, and we've of course been talking about that cost in terms of soil degradation for the last 2 days, right? Because as we went into high input, high industrial agriculture, cultivation, fertilization, biocides, irrigation, more soil clearing, we've done an enormous amount of damage, eating away, mining, degrading that soil base, and obviously oxidizing that soil carbon sponge we talked about this morning, that in a sense all that life depends on. And in a sense it's now us waking up to, hey, we've done damage, we have to regenerate, we are responsible. That's easy to say, that's a policy matter, but we are also, and we have to be response-able, which comes down to the grassroots community. How do we agency engage that responsibility, not ability? Both are needed. Okay, apart from degrading the earth, which we've been talking about, we've also actually fundamentally degraded our food system, because now we have industrial foods, and of course foods have become, in the last 50 years, food technology, marketing have become the biggest, growth industry. And we now have foods, and we look at foods in terms of, appeal, convenience, flavoring, preservation, all those sorts of subliminal consumer marketing messages. Very rarely do we look at nutritional value. And so it's become a virtual situation. We run a $10 trillion global multinational food industry now in the world, $10 trillion. The farming sector gets about $2 trillion, but don't go to the bank yet, because easily 60% of that gets bled off by input costs and debt servicing and insurance. So the poor farmers might get 0.6, 0.7 of $1 trillion globally. So we've got a $10 trillion food industry, but because of our degradation of that food, we also run about a $10 trillion a year global disease industry. Roughly, like plus or minus, and people will dispute. I mean, no, we're better than them, and don't count us in with them. But at the bottom line, and this disease industry is really, really sick. I mean, really sick, because that's what disease industries are. But the point is that in the last 50 years, we've gone through an exponential explosion, growing at 10% per annum still, of these diseases. Whether it's obesity, diabetics, cancer, cardiac, autoimmune, allergenic, the whole range of diseases. In the 19th century, we had diseases, sure, but they were bacteria or viruses from the external environment. But these diseases that are now crippling us horrendously, the $10 trillion disease industry, is substantially self-induced. It is us, it is our biochemistry that we have altered, changed, bastardized, that's what we say in Australia, and basically, like we are causing this to ourselves. A cancer cell is us. Don't blame anyone else, it's us. It's just gone AWOL, that we don't control anymore because we've changed aspects of our biochemistry, that don't make it work anymore. And so we're now facing this massive dilemma. I went into the Green Revolution. There were about 1 billion people that were hungry then. And there's 1 billion people that are still without food, not because we can't grow it, they just can't afford it, so they just drop off the perch. We just forget about them. There's about another 1 billion people that don't have water. There's about 3 billion people that don't have sanitation still. Over 50% of us live in cities, totally vulnerable, totally exposed to, like food and nutrient and inputs, totally vulnerable to pandemics from our effluent and what have you, right? And our environment. And so we've still got this massive risk factor and disease condition in the way we live. And so we've got to address that, because if we don't address the health at this level, we don't need to worry about the health at that level. We won't be around. Okay? We've talked about the process. Mother Nature, she created this thing. She can recreate it at a drop of a hat. We know exactly what she's going to do and how she's going to do it, and say, hey, we'll say, oh, we could have done that. But if we don't fix this, hey, it's all hypothetical, right? Okay, so this question is, we have this disease industry, self-induced, it's very much related to what we eat. And so the real issue, it's very much related to the nutritional integrity of what we eat. So can I now go back to, I wasn't around here, I wasn't that old, but let's go back to 3.8 billion years ago. And remember, we had the supernova 4.6 billion years ago, you know, like the water came onto the Earth and started precipitating, condensing and forming the oceans about 4.2 billion years ago. Some of it may have come from a comet, we're not sure. But 3.8 billion years ago, something happened. We had, in a sense, the primordial soup, okay? And it was around these smokers, you know, these volcanic vents, and there's arguments whether it was acid or alkaline and what have you. But we basically had water on this planet. We had this chemical soup. It was definitely a toxic chemical soup. And then something miraculously happened. But it's not miraculous. I mean, we'll just go through it now. It's really very elementary and simple. And you formed a lipid, right? And so, like it's an oil drop, like a lipid. And you can do this yourself at home and create your own life if you like. Don't. But okay, you've got a lipid oil drop, you know, and it's just an oil thing. And then you've got a lipid oil drop. And inside the lipid oil drop, if you drop another, with a pipette, another drop of this soup, right? You put another drop in there. So you have a soup out there, you have a lipid film, and you've got more soup inside. And that's effectively what was going on 3.8 billion years ago. And then this lipid film started acting as a membrane. Okay? It started acting as a membrane. And then very, very interestingly, it was starting to say, look, we can concentrate essential nutrients. So instead of there being just say 2 parts per million phosphorus out there, it was concentrating 30 parts per million phosphorus inside. You know, so then the capacity to transport ions across this lipid membrane, and therefore you had higher concentrations of some essential nutrients. But what this lipid membrane was then also able to do, it was able to exclude, and this was very important in those early days, a lot of these toxic materials. So you might have had 200 cadmium, aluminium or other toxic ions out there. And basically because of that exclusion potential, you ended up with 2 parts per million inside. Okay? And so this capacity of these proto-membranes 3.8 billion years ago to concentrate essential nutrients and exclude toxic nutrients was in a sense the foundation of life. Okay? And basically that was in technically or hypothetically the first cell. And what happened when you then sort of had okay, we've got it here, 2 parts per million outside, 30 parts per million inside, and this is very, very narrow. This is about 20 angstroms, and an angstrom is a billionth of a meter, so it's very, very thin. You had a difference in charge density on the outside compared to the inside of these essential nutrients. And when you have a difference in charge density, you get an electrical potential. And the electrical potential is a function of, the charge, charge out over inside divided by the distance. Okay? So you had the electrical potential reflected, in a sense, what is the charge difference, the charge differential, over the distance that they're separated. And because the distance is so massively small, there was an enormous energetics, electrical stimulation of the biochemistry inside these droplets. And it's that electrical energy that then started driving these biochemical processes inside that cell. And from those biochemical processes, we then evolved the initial prokaryotic cells, and from then on, every other living cell from 3.8 billion years ago has in a sense evolved from that initial reaction. There's a paper in Nature that more or less describes this electrical potential thing. There's other papers totally scientifically substantiated. Here is the role of these semi-permeable membranes, these protomembranes, in concentrating and excluding. And this is powerful, and I go back to 3.8 billion years ago, because those mycorrhizal fungi that we've come to love, and that's what I was working on in my life in microbiology, they are actually exactly the same thing. They are just, remember we talked about it, 25,000 kilometers of fungal hyphae per cubic meter of soil, and they are actually just tubes of almost identical membranes, identical, nutrient uptake physiology. Obviously, the membranes have developed more and more sophistication because we've now got 3.8 billion years of evolution, refinement, perfection, refinement, perfection. But basically all of life, every living cell is still governed by the same issues of concentration of essential, exclusion of toxics, and because of that difference in charge density, here is the electrical potential and the energetics in that cell. You break that cell, you break this cell, you're back to the toxic primordial soup. We're dead. Okay, so life is simply a matter of, your soup in intact membranes. That's simple. You see? You put yourself in a microwave, you're just soup. Because you've broken your membranes, right? Okay, so this is a simple transition. That was 3.8, obviously 420 million years ago, when Mother Nature said, look, I want to colonize the land. Like basically, remember we said there was oceans, there was rock, there was no life on land. And so Mother Nature said, look, I need to, she didn't say that. The fungi said that, bugger this, I'm off there getting some extra nutrients. But basically these fungi grew onto the land, and that's exactly what they did. They grew on with their membranes over the land, and then basically here's a soil particle, grow over the soil particle, and they're there solubilizing the phosphate, the zinc, the magnesium, whatever, actively solubilizing, pumping out enzymes to solubilizing it, taking it up, and taking that zinc and the magnesium and all those essential 33 elements back in their hyphae to feed their plant, to feed the lichens. Remember, we've got a lot of lichen. Okay, and so the whole role of these membrane interfaces are selective, active nutrient uptake.
I'm sorry, I just spaced. I don't understand. Say again about the fungi. Are they acting the same as the cell?
Yeah, okay.
Is the membrane for us?
No, okay, absolutely. These, there's basically been, 3.4 billion years of sophisticated evolution, but the mechanism's exactly the same. This fungal is just a tube, whereas this was a cell, right? Exactly the same process.
The cell is self-contained, though.
Yeah.
It can attract other cells and build.
Yeah, well, it'll bud on,
You're saying the fungi is continuous?
Yeah, no, it'll bud off other cells. No, okay, no, the fungus is exactly the same as this. Initially, the initial primitive fungi are more septate, right? So they're more or less a series of cells in chains.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's exactly this. Bacteria, okay, here's the initial bacterial cell programming. So it just takes up nutrients, more energy, more biochemical, gets big enough and it just buds off another one, right? And so bang, there's life, right? And this is exactly the same thing, except they just do it in a linear format because they want to get around the place, right?
Then where's the membrane and do they have a membrane?
Yeah, there's a membrane right around them, right?
They have a membrane?
This blue line that I've drawn is exactly that membrane, right? There's a membrane, a hyphal membrane, all around. Okay, perhaps we should explain it. Remember we're talking about glomalin and stuff. Sure, they'll also produce a cell wall. So there's a glomalin cell wall, but now we're just talking about the biochemical membrane, right? And so that membrane then extends 25,000 kilometers. So we've got this massive membrane interface between the soil particles and the plant, right? Through these fungal hyphae.
Is there only one membrane, or are there a series of
No, okay, well what happened? Okay, well, it gets kilometers of this thing. Now,
But are there other substances?
okay, so, I mean, yeah, I'm trying to not make it too complicated. Obviously, this is then the tube that evolved. Progressively, they've dropped these septa. They don't need them anymore, right? Because it's more efficient to operate as a pipe. They do now have, they do have now organelles with other membranes and mitochondria and all that stuff in them, just as these things evolved from prokaryotes to eukaryotes. There was a cellular evolution, and there's a whole lot of biochemistry there. But what I'm trying to say is the same basic principle of a membrane extending throughout the soil, 25,000 kilometers, meter cube, and basically intimately interfacing with mineral particles and organic matter particles, and directly with enzymes solubilizing and taking up, but doing exactly this, concentrating essentials, excluding toxins. Okay? And so this is in this massive microbial interface. And that's, of course, what we talked about yesterday. That's what enables a rainforest to grow on sand dunes. That enables a desert to be revegetated, because you've got this exquisitely efficient, extensive, active nutrient uptake process proliferating through the soil, selecting essential nutrients, excluding toxins. It's, in a sense, a membrane interface between the toxic chemical soup, or that soil environment, and the cytoplasm of the living cell.
You were talking about using mycorrhizae and plants to uptake lead.
Okay,
night.
yep. No, okay,
So
good.
that's
Okay, well, look, yep, we can, okay.
At any point. Do you want to
No.
finish where you're going?
Now let's just put a bubble now at the side, because we'll talk about that. Obviously, with evolution, these things have got really quite smart, right? And we've just had the question, these mycorrhiza actually can also concentrate toxins. But they don't concentrate toxins because they like them. They concentrate toxins because they want to get rid of them, right? If there's toxins in the environment, these things can bioremediate. Okay, and what they'll do then, but in the same processes, they will actively just say absorb lead from a toxic lead-based environment. They will transport that lead through their hyphae, and we'll do this here in a separate little diagram. Okay, so of course they've got a plant that they're growing on, because they need that plant for their sugars. Okay, so they've got now, and this is if you've got a lead contaminant or if you've got a radioactive contaminated site, same story. So there's your fungal hyphae proliferating. So they'll take the lead, actively solubilize it through these membranes, transport it to the plant, and then they'll park that lead, just say in the bark tissue, of that plant. So then you'll have basically heavy bark, won't you? Because lead's heavy, that's just be silly. But no, you'll have lead-enriched bark. And of course that helps the plant, because basically nothing's going to eat a, lead-on plant. Leaded bark plant, right? No insect, no sense, because they'll just die. They'll, eat this thing. Okay, so basically the fungi then harvest the lead from that toxic environment and put it into a neutral space that is external to the biochemical life cycle, things like dead bark. And we were talking about in the context, and of course this is biotechnology really excellence, what we then do is we just harvest that plant, take that plant, we then burn that plant, we collect the CO2, we collect the heat, and we collect the lead oxide. This is mega dollars. Okay? So instead of mining lead, which costs a lot of money, you just harvest pollutants in plants, and then you basically say, look, I can use the CO2 again, I can use heat as all sorts of valuable product, but I've also got lead oxide. And the lead oxide, of course, then is straight back into industrial processes, so I don't need to actually mine the lead. So I'm getting this at 3% of the cost that it would be mining more lead. And
That's happening?
oh yeah, we do that all the time.
Not just as a sense of remediating soil, but to actually mine lead using plants.
Well, no, okay, well, look, let's be honest. Politics, come on. At the moment, you, as a taxpayer, are subsidising mining to such an obscene level that it's still easier to exploit and mine somebody's land and contaminate land and externalise all the consequences, right? But certainly, yeah, we can do this, we do this, but it's not a major industrial activity now because the subsidies are completely distorting the economics, because the externality of lead contamination, no, we've just passed that on to our children, right? They'll have to worry about it. We don't pay for it. If we paid for it, we'd be doing this sort of stuff pretty pronto. Tim?
This is a sidebar, and I'll make it really quick. Is anybody who's really quick off the mark going out to Sudbury, Ontario, and started, mining lead biologically on the hectare after hectare that's hopelessly contaminated out there? Downwind from the old smelter.
Yeah, okay, no, well look, I don't know about that, but
That's all right.
but as parallel, I was in Bougainville. Bougainville's an island in the Pacific, northeast of Papua New Guinea. There was a CRA silver copper mine there, and basically they of course extract so much, from the current process, and they got thousands, millions of tons of tailings. And so we were looking at, how do we actually clean up those tailings by using these processes to, both bioremediate, but also biomine additional toxin. At Kalgoorlie, in our desert in Western Australia, we've got the world's biggest gold mine, monstrous sort of pit, monstrous quantity of tailings, and then, the extra gold we get through this process is, money. Not as good as diamonds, but that comes from carbon. Okay, distortion. Hang on, where were we? But and we can do the same thing with radioactivity, right? If we want to decontaminate a radioactive site, not that I'm into radioactivity, terrible stuff. But we were doing monazite, which is thorium phosphate, and in a sense, these mycorrhizae, we've got mycorrhizae that then preferentially take, phosphorus from the thorium. Okay, because that's in these sand dunes actually the only source of phosphorus. And then we can also actually harvest the thorium. And of course then people are talking about we need thorium for, reactors and stuff like that. But it gets sophisticated, but it's totally doable. Right, it was very important stuff, thank you, but it's...
That's a quick question. So I hear like in California they're taking fracking fluid and using it to water plants that we're going to eat.
Yeah, no. Very...
What happens when they do that?
Well, I mean, okay, so good. We'll come into that because, you're still totally exposed to a pretty toxic soup. And we'll come into that, definitely. But then you'll have the other question, when are we going to start bioremediating this land? I know back in the late 70s, there was a register of 10,000 sites in the US of heavily contaminated soils and regions, 10,000. But I think they withdrew that register, right? They don't tell you about that anymore.
Okay, let's keep going with
Let's keep on to this. But but it's been relevant because what we're saying, we have a very, very sophisticated, selective nutrient uptake mechanism in these mycorrhizal fungi. So when Chris says she likes mycorrhizal fungi, it's not just they're warm and fuzzy and stuff like that. They are really very, very clever, intelligent biotechnologies in the positive natural sense, right? So let's go to nature and let's go to nutrient uptake, okay? Okay, and so that's the mechanism. Now, and let's draw a line under this, but it's still relevant. Now, Chris will tell us that, 95% of plants in nature are obligate mycorrhizal, right? The whole of nutrition in nature works through these symbiotic nutrient uptake processes because nutrients in nature are either in mineral locked up form, we talked about this briefly yesterday, they're either locked up in mineral forms, unavailable to plants. So we had 3 phases. We could have them locked up in the reserve bank. We could have them on our cation exchange capacity, but we needed carbon to do that, or clay minerals too, but carbon. Or the danger elsewhere that if they weren't there, they're in the soil solution, in the liquid around the soil, and if they're there, the danger is that they're going to leach, right? Run out into the rivers, pollute your rivers. So the nutrients basically can be in these different pools, and of course our interest is to say, no, how do we keep them in the soil but make them available? And so in nature, 95% of plants are mycorrhizal, with these extensive healthy soils, with extensive networks. And so, again, I'd say, again, it's a question, but over 95% of the nutrition of plants in nature is governed by these fungal hyphal nutrient uptake systems, right? So again, if we sort of draw ourselves a plant, okay, and basically it is these networks of fungal hyphae that are really governing 95% of the nutrition of those natural plants. And they do that obviously, logically, just the extension, the area extension of these hyphae, and basically their capacity then colonize sites that the root can never get to, right? The root is actually really there, the plant is really only there as the carbon source to feed these fungi. As a microbiologist, I don't walk into a forest and say, these are nice trees. I walk and these are nice fungi. And yeah, I know you've got green stuff up there that's feeding you, right? But the real business of the soil, the business of the forest is going on in the soil. But I'm biased. Okay, so nutrition in nature is all driven by these systems. But there's something, and this is work that we did in CSIRO in the late 70s, it's fully published and stuff like that, and I gave a paper at IFOAM, the International Federation of Organic Agriculture, in Witzenhausen in Germany in '84. But there's something actually even more special about these mycorrhizal fungi. And that really is, in a sense, the guts of what we want to get to today. Basically, you've got these fungal hyphae, and okay, here's our mineral particles, and they're basically taking up, they're basically concentrating, they're basically concentrating essentials and excluding toxic nutrients, right? And we did some experiments, and it was partly with these mining soils, so it's always worthwhile looking at those. And if we put these fungi in a low zinc soil, a soil with very, very low zinc levels, right? Essential nutrient zinc, then basically, okay, there's just say 2 zinc out there, 2 lots of zinc here. These fungi will definitely increase the zinc uptake, and compared to non-mycorrhizal controls, they'll have 130% zinc uptake compared to plants without mycorrhizal fungi, right? So they're actually actively solubilizing, actively taking up zinc. If we put the same mycorrhizal fungi in a soil which has more than adequate zinc, it's no problems, again, they'll still take it up, but they'll just simply sort of cruise along at 100% of the control zinc level, right? So what they're doing, they're actually responding to that soil environment. When there's a deficiency, they will concentrate start working hard, concentrating the essential zinc that the plant needs. But when there's adequate zinc, they'll just cruise along. And the reverse happens when you've got toxic soils. Again, where you've got, just say, in this case, the experiment was with aluminium, where you have a soil that's normal or not particularly toxic with aluminium, so most soils, thankfully, around here certainly aren't, then again, you'll get basically, okay, here's aluminium, it might be 300 parts per million, but it's manageable, and so then basically compared to the non-mycorrhizal control, these ones will still have just 100% of the non-mycorrhizal, so they don't have a big deal. But where you get toxic levels of aluminium, right, so if we've got aluminium sort of at 800 parts per million, where it's getting toxic, then these mycorrhizal switch in and they will actually exclude that aluminium actively, and you'll have 30%, or 32, very plus or minus 32% of the non-mycorrhizal plants. But what we're really sort of confirming there, in this reverse experimental studies, and then we actually did more studies looking at the scanning electron microprobe, and we can look at the particular sand grains, and we can see actually how the hyphae are solubilizing and taking up and tracking the nutrients, but that's more detail. But what we've got here is actually these things are intelligent, right? I mean, you're sitting down, but these fungi are intelligent. They're switching on and off selective, active nutrient uptake processes depending on that external environment. Okay, so when there's zinc deficiencies, they will be hunting out zinc actively. When there's zinc is no problems, there's plenty and adequate there, hey, they don't need to do anything. And vice versa, when there's toxic elements, they'll switch on active toxic. And of course, we then go back, well, wow, how do these guys do this? And in a sense, again, you look at the fungal hyphae, and you go now in bigger, scanning microscopes sort of studies, and all these things, these hyphae, these membranes have got these thing called ion channels, right? And so you could almost think of it as a little revolving door, right? You have those in hotel lobbies. And basically, you can see it that, okay, they've got revolving doors, and if they need the zinc, right, here's the zinc, they'll take it up in the revolving door, but if there's aluminium that they don't want, they just block the revolving doors. So these ion channels, they're called ION channels. These ion channels are actually the mechanism by which this membrane selectively, intelligently concentrates what it wants, what it needs, what the plant needs, and excludes what it doesn't want, but can do so, selectively, actively, intelligently. Intelligent is perhaps a bad word, but I don't know what other word there is. Yeah.
So is it sort of reading what the concentration is in the plant?
No, it doesn't care about the plant. The plant is just sugar factory, right? I'll come back to that. It's reading what's in that soil. It's going into that soil and saying, hang on, I'm in this environment. And so which ion channels will I switch on, which ones will I switch off? And I will then harvest from that soil what I want for my cytoplasm, right? So it basically knows what it wants. What it wants from the plant is just sugars, But of course, the plant has exactly the same biochemistry that it has, because it has the same nutrient requirements. So in a sense, it's providing the plant with exactly the nutrients that it needs and the plant needs. If it doesn't give the plant the nutrients the plant needs, the plant shuts down sugars, it starves, and that's a dumb deal, right? So do you understand? There's a positive feedback loop that it will provide the plant with the nutrients it wants in the right forms, ratios, concentrations, balances.
Is it also transporting water?
Okay, good question. Yes, it does. Okay, beautiful question. It actually takes up water, but because it works at this micromolecular level, it is able to take up water way, way, way beyond wilting point. Normally plants' roots can take up water between field capacity and then wilting point, right? So there's different tensions. And these guys keep on taking up water way, 4 or 5 times past that in terms of tensions. Tensions of minus 15 atmospheres, right? Enormously, they keep sucking. But the volume of water that they're taking up at that, there's not that much soil water there, when it's so dry. They'll still keep taking water, but it is water to keep the plant alive rather than water to actively transpire a lot of water out of the plant.
Can I just interject? What I understand is, if you feel soil and it feels slightly moist, you're probably maybe in the 60-some% range, but once it gets below that, it will feel dry, but that is not totally dry. It still has 58% moisture, but it's hung up in the interstices.
Really very fine films, yeah.
And so, and hydrogen bonded or whatever, so you don't feel that. It feels dry, it acts dry, but of course, these hyphae don't know that. They feel the water because they're acting on a molecular level.
Yeah.
And so they can mine the water down to what I heard was 22% moisture.
Yeah.
Instead of, when you're below 60,
your
plants are not going to get water without
Yeah.
the mycorrhizae.
Right, but volumetrically that water isn't, like buckets of water, but it's all the essential water it needs to keep that plant alive. And remember, we talked the guts in this game is longevity of green. Okay, so that biochemical water to keep that plant ticking, definitely. Okay, so we've got basically this concept that, these mycorrhizas will give you an intelligent, selective, active nutrient interface between the dead, mineral, toxic soil and, of course, its cytoplasm and the cytoplasm of the plant. And that's, Chris.
Well, I was going to follow up a little bit on
Water.
not with the water, but on some of the drivers that can happen that for some plant species, you'll get some signals that will come to the mycorrhizal fungus through the different concentrations and the types of sugars that it gives to the fungus that will essentially tell the fungus what it has, some of the needs that it has, so that the fungus can connect different plants together and you can actually get nutrients that will flow from one plant to another plant through the fungus based on the demands that one plant may have. And you see this a lot in legume, non-legume relationships where you can get nitrogen and phosphorus flow through the fungus based on the demands that each of those plants are having. So it's there's a, as you said, that there's sort of a need. All the organisms, the plant and the fungus, have the same need for some of the nutrients that are there. But there's also a little bit of signal type of language that can happen that can drive the plant to be able to get its needs, particular needs, satisfied.
Look, and in the Pacific Northwest in America, you've got mycorrhizal nets of several square kilometers, an area, one organism, one family of organisms, all interconnected, but effectively all interconnected. And if that somebody, 200 meters that way needs a zinc molecule, they'll shunt it from 200 meters over here to feed them. If somebody attacks a plant over here, they'll basically rally sort of nutrients and responses, chemical responses from the whole forest to that attacked plant. So, I don't want to talk about intelligence, but they're getting a bit wacko, aren't they? These guys are sort of organized. Okay, but actually that's another sentient question. Sorry, Teresa.
Is that, so I just moved to Vermont, and what I notice is when you look at the landscape, all the you realize trees stay within the same size of each other. You don't see one. Occasionally you see one tree, but for the most part they all stay.
That's right.
Within the same size. Nobody takes all the nutrients and it gets really, really big. And is that because of this?
Well, that's right. They work in communities and complementation and cooperation and synergies and symbioses, right? And this is really symbiosis godfather, right? This is how how they operate, connect, interarrange.
So
Right?
it's intentional.
Okay. Okay, so what we've got now, and this is so important, this is a 25,000, healthy, active, intelligent interface between the toxic mineral world and the plant. And the important thing to realize is that all our food, up till just say the Green Revolution, Second World War, was grown in this mechanism, right? Basically all our food, if you look at all our potatoes, tomatoes, lettuces, pine trees, avocado trees, pawpaw, like our food is grown through these mycorrhizal systems. And that's how nature grew our food. And until the Second World War, that's how we grew our food. And so we grew our food with this, in a sense, this intelligent quality control interface. And think of it as a quality control interface between a toxic chemical soil world and our plants and our own digestive health. Okay? And it was extremely efficient at nutrient uptake, as we just talked, extremely efficient at longevity of green growth, but more than that, selectively intelligent that it could exclude and concentrate according to what we need. We need 33 plus essential nutrients. Most of those 33 are trace quantities, parts per billion, but it's fundamental. For example, if we don't have selenium, we don't have that molecule to form that perioxidase enzyme, and if we don't have that perioxidase enzyme, we can't kill cancer cells. That's simple, right? And there's plenty of those sort of direct relationship where, hey, that one molecule of selenium is fundamental to that biochemical enzyme process. If we don't have that selenium, we don't have the process, and obviously then we have the consequence. So not that we understand all disease by any means in terms of every, what are the exact micronutrient requirements for the enzymes to drive it, but there's enough examples to say this is happening all the time, and not just a single trace element molecule either. They often work in combinations, right? So biochemistry is extremely sophisticated, so you might need a suite. But the bottom line is without those trace elements in the right forms, ratio, concentration, balances, we don't have that biochemistry, we don't have that disease defense. Okay, so in a sense we've never had to worry about it because Mother Nature or what we've evolved with had this extremely efficient, intelligent interface on our behalf. I should mention here too, I think most of us raised this, these fungi, we see them, and we don't think of them as primitive. These things are actually proto-animals. There is nothing in the phylogenetic evolution of life on Earth that is closer to animals than these higher fungi. They may look primitive, but that's just, they just operate underground, so they don't have to be pretty. They just basically exist, but they're proto-animals. They're like amoeba, protozoa, they're proto-animals, and they have a biochemical almost identical to ours. Okay, so we're really saying this is our great, great, great fairy godmother in that soil, interfacing that toxic world on our behalf. But that's fairy tale stuff, so I don't want to go there. Somebody had a question? Oh, yeah, Jan.
Sorry, you said the Green Revolution was sort of the end of that?
Okay, let's go there.
You were plowing for...
Okay, yeah, all right. We were plowing and we were adding guano and we were adding ash and stuff like that. But the scale at which we were doing it, right, was certainly nothing like what's happened since, but we'll go into that in a second. Nothing like since. There's no question we were destroying these things, and obviously we created 5 billion hectares of desert, so there's a dividends, there's a result. But we've basically, in the Anthropocene, we've gone exponentially in our capacity to do that, right? But so let's now flip to exactly our industrial hydroponic post-green revolution world. Who's laughing? Okay, so here's nature, and here we are, industrial hydroponics. Okay, and we've talked about nature, you know, exactly, I mean, that's what we've been drawing. Here are, again, these 25,000 kilometers of hyphae. That's physics, the physicality of it, but what we've really been talking about this morning is this intelligent interface, right? And the selectivity, the active selectivity. And again, it's not just the 25,000 kilometers, because obviously this works on a surface area basis, so you've got to multiply that by pi diameter times length, because it's a surface area of membranes interfacing with the soil, right? But that's just mathematics. And so we know that basically this gave us, in nature, our 33 plus nutrients that basically the plants needed, our food needed, and Charlie needed, or Mary needed, right? Mary needed that, okay? And so everything was sweet, and we never had to bother about it because, hey, nature looked after us. And now we stepped into a post-Second World War world, and of course the Second World War was all about industrial, you know, explosion, development, competence. So we ended up with, D9s and big tractors and what have you, right? So we could cultivate. And so our cultivation, went exponential. Just look at John Deere horsepower sales, right? And of course we had oil to burn, and of course in industrial hydroponics, in that industrial thing, we were using 10 units of oil energy for every unit of food energy. So we had to burn it away somewhere, to get rid of that much oil was a hard job. We also, of course, had a global munitions factory from the war. You know, we made munitions, substantially ammonium nitrate. And after the war, when we stopped blowing things up, we had to do something with that munitions capability. So what better thing to do than make fertilizer, right? And so all that munitions chemical industry went into the fertilizer industry. And basically, so whether it was cultivation, whether it was fertilization, whether it was irrigation, because we could do all that massive earthworks, and then we had gone into a nerve gas industry in the war because, we had to be capable. So we had actually a nerve gas, sophisticated organic chemistry industry, and of course we turned that into our biocides. And a lot of the compounds are actually, those nerve gas derivatives, right? Okay, and so basically we had all that capability, and then we needed a market for it because, hey, how do you keep this thing viable unless you have a market for it? And of course the market was agriculture, right? Because there we are, we could grow more food with all these inputs, and that's exactly what we did. But in doing so, we already know that we completely we killed these sorts of mycorrhizal symbioses, right? Because as Jan has already told us, all these things are deleterious to these symbiotic networks. And so now these roots on this side, they're in a different world completely, because you're back down to the mineral particles. Remember, Tim, we were talking about, we're back to the sands, the mineral particles. Sure, these mineral particles have negative charges on them, and they will hold some, but they also lock up a lot of zinc, magnesium, and unavailable forms. And so these plants in this industrial thing, they were actually dependent on nutrients that they could get from the soil solution, right? Okay, so they basically said, there's some minerals there, but actually I can't get access to them because, hey, it was a hyphae solubilization capacity that gave me access. So I now get nutrients from the soil solution. I get whatever is in the soil solution. And if that's chock-a-block with nitrate, sulfate, some phosphate, soluble phosphate, NPK, and potassium, of course, then yeah, I'm getting basically supersaturation NPK, okay? But I'm not getting any of these trace essential nutrients because they're not available to me in the soil solution, because they're either on the organic matter, which I burnt off, or they're on, solubilized from these mineral surfaces, which I don't have the mechanism to solubilize. Okay, so now I'm in a system where I'm saturated with NPK, supersaturated, but also I don't have those trace elements, so sorry, you'll have to go without. And so basically these plants are taking up these soluble nutrients as if they were straws, right? You might as well have said, look, here are straws, I'm sucking up that soil solution, passively taking whatever's in the soil solution because that's going up as part of my transpiration stream. Okay, so the whole selective, active, intelligent interface is gone. The quality control system is gone, and I'm just actually sucking this thing up from the soil solution as straws. And if I happen to have, cadmium and lead and sodium and aluminium in that soil solution because the way I've managed the land or the fertilizers I've put onto that thing, sorry Charlie, this is just going up as well. And so these plants are now, these hydroponic plants, have the risk, the potential to be, super saturated with NPK, sulfur, zero or next to zero trace elements. And again, toxic in terms of these sorts of compounds that were in the soil. Okay, so here we are, our industrial food system. Tim.
I'm concerned that the term hydroponics at the top of the there might be a bit misleading and
provocative.
And give an image of an operation in which the roots are actually in water tanks. But you're calling hydroponic stuff that's actually terrestrially land-based.
No, I'm with you, and I am provocative, because I'm going to fly back to Australia, so I can be. But no, you're right. But no, why I use the word hydroponic, because effectively we are growing it in a soil solution hydroponic bath. The soil could be lumps of glass or lumps of concrete or whatever, ping pong balls, right? They're just there as a physical matrix to try to keep that plants upright. But we're not using that soil effectively as a means of nutrition, and we have completely aborted that interface, that quality control system that nature had provided that had governed our nutritional integrity and health. So I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, but the contrast is absolute, right? And okay, so now what we've got the situation, our food is now with that. And of course, exactly that. If we go now, UK Ministry of Health analysis, USDA analysis, our industrial food now has often less than a third of the nutrients per unit weight in terms of unit concentration, but often zero of these essential trace elements. Okay? And often saturated with these toxic, and that's in a sense a chemical analysis of that food. Yes?
Would you say that again, please?
Okay, well basically plenty of studies by the UK Ministry of Health, USDA and what have you has confirmed that our food now grown in this system has about a third or less than a third of the nutrient concentration of, key nutrients, but often zero or very, very low levels of these essential trace elements, these 33 essential trace elements needed for our biochemistry, and often very, very high levels of lead, calcium, or what have you, lead, cadmium, and those sorts of things, to the extent, of course, that our food labeling becomes almost like a warning list, isn't it? You've got to read that label in microprint to say, hang on, can I eat this stuff? Whereas back here, you relied on nature to say, hang on, this was grown naturally in healthy soils, and therefore I can trust nature, right? Okay, and so we've had this fundamental difference.
I got another chart I'll put on the pile.
Okay.
That includes, one study that shows drastic reduction.
Thank you.
On the order that you're talking about.
Thank
Some
you.
don't show as much loss.
No, sure.
There's all
Sure.
kinds of studies, so it's
Yeah,
hard to know.
yeah. And nobody cut their throats or slit their wrists at the moment because there's still food. I mean, if you buy an avocado, it's still grown from a tree that's mycorrhizal dependent, and it's, it doesn't need this, it doesn't use this. If you buy citrus, or not citrus, a bit worse because we've actually started using a lot of this in citrus, but I mean, pretty naturally grown citrus is still obligate mycorrhiza. So there's still a lot of plants that, I mean, it's not totally black and white, but obviously I'm trying to make a distinction between where we were and where we've gone to, right? And anyway, I don't know how much time we've got left. We're good? Okay. But the point is, this is, in a sense, the background, the process understanding of what we're facing with this whole nutritional health issue, right? Because we are now living in a world with, these exponential, exploding, self-induced diseases, as we said, obesity, diabetes, cancer, et cetera, cardiac, et cetera, growing at 10% per annum. 17%, as I understand, of the US GDP is driven by your disease industry, growing at 10% per annum. Well, you go 17% at 10% and ask yourself where you're going to be in 5 years' time, let alone 10 years' time. But more than that, people are suffering. Over 70% of us are effectively subclinically malnourished. We can't get away from it, right? Like the symptoms, whether it's obesity, diabetics are probably depending on the community, society, 40, 50. But there's another big cohort subclinically malnourished.
Yeah. Globally, over 1 million people die each year from zinc, iron, or vitamin A deficiencies.
Yeah.
Over 1 million a year.
Yeah. Also, let me explain. I've been talking about these mineral trace elements that are taken up from soils, so I'm making that, very much the narrative directly. Okay, here's healthy soils, healthy food, healthy people, but these trace elements are then fundamentally involved in producing the vitamins and all the other plant-based essential nutrient components of food, right? If they don't have these trace elements, they're not making the vitamins and all the actual food components in the plant that, again, we need for our health, right? So we've completely stuffed up then that whole biochemistry of that plant. And sure, we're eating starch, cellulose, water, sugar, flavorings, additives, preservatives, cardboard boxes. But the point is that it's not much use for us, right? Okay, so this is in a sense, I can switch that off now. This is in a sense the dilemma that really we're now facing, right? Because, and this is the opportunity too, because in a sense we've been talking the first 2 days about, how do we grow healthy soils? How do we put carbon into soils? But this is really the biggest positive that you guys have got. Because there will be 10 billion people projected on the planet, and every one of those has a fundamental existential self-interest about health. And realizing that their health is totally dependent not on the antibiotics they eat, but on the healthy food that they can access. And the differentiation now becomes, okay, do I have confidence in my food and what its nutritional integrity is, or have I got confidence in food, how it is grown? Can food be grown back in these natural, healthy soils systems? And can you trust your fairy godmother back here in the biochemistry to look after that balance for you? And this is now, in a sense, the frontier for agriculture in the 21st century, right? Because yes, we can grow crops, yes, we can keep on degrading land, and yes, we can add that food into a commodity food, $10 trillion food sector. Or can we actually grow food with high nutritional integrity, enormously higher health value from healthy soils, and create viable local food systems, eco-businesses, and healthy communities through that? And the answer is, of course, yes, we can. Very easily, practically, profitably, because it's always a matter of just understanding these processes and say, hey, we're going to differentiate on this basis, we're going to educate on this basis, and then every sentient human being with self-interest in their survival will say, hey, I want to move here. So we're, in a sense, looking at a demand driver, commercial demand driver to get back into healthy food from healthy source. And so that's, in a sense, in a way, to where I see the horizons opening, because we've been pioneering and working at, how do we restore soils, how do we restore soil carbon, and doing it all that for the altruistic. Here's a planet, cooling the planet, here's rebuilding biosystems. But basically what we've got now is, in a sense, we can offer every one of those 10 billion people to say, look, here is a preventative health pathway option that's all revolving around growing healthy food on healthy soils. So is that controversial, or have I got reactions, or? Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very much minded towards organic agriculture and have been for 50 years.
Yeah.
But I wonder from a disease study perspective, what kind of data is out there.
Okay.
I know that some
Okay.
countries in the world,
Okay.
third world countries that are growing their own food have much lower disease rates than we do.
Well, they often have other diseases. They have the malarias and the biotic diseases, agents, but they're not dying for these self-induced diet-related diseases. Yeah.
So do you?
Yeah, as far as the data, okay, so again, no, good, a very important point. So again, we're, I suppose, been innovating, like with the soil carbon and stuff. There's enormous amount of data, but it's evidence, hard evidence, but in different forms, right? So it's really that forensic scientific analysis of mapping all the data and then getting the pattern analysis understanding. It's totally valid to say there's areas that, no, we don't know details about. We need to know more, right? No question. But if you then go through the thing, okay, yes, we know, Glenn's just told us, here is the nutritional integrity analysis of our industrial food and how it's decreased in the last years, right? We know basically here is the 10% growth in these self-induced diseases. We know the biochemistry of these micronutrient deficiencies on the enzyme microbiology, on the enzyme biochemistry in inducing diseases, right? Selenium, perioxidase, cancer. Again, there's a whole lot of diseases, where parallel studies like that are being done and being researched, and more data is coming all the way, but we certainly don't know all of it. And in a sense, what we're bringing to the debate, that's all established and there's no real contest about that. But I suppose what we're doing here today, is to say, well, look, hang on a minute. This has a relationship back into soils, and this has a relationship how plants are growing in that soil under which paradigm. Now that's, again, we published that in CSIRO in the late 70s, early 80s, but the significance of that in terms of preventative health certainly hasn't blossomed, right? But again, the facts and the evidence are solid.
So I think the information, the idea is there to sell it from the bottom up.
Yes.
To your neighbor, to your community.
Yeah.
But I think in terms of the top down, getting the government to change where they're putting their money.
Yeah.
Is the data there?
Okay, well, a very, very important point, and several answers, right? First of all, yes, it has to be the bottom up, because basically that's where you in a democracy vote. You vote every time you go into a shop and put $1 on the counter in exchange for a product. That's when you vote. Right? The rest is circuses, hustle. I apologize, Elizabeth. Okay? But also it was said before, and it's very important, that, yeah, the policy people, they're really well-intentioned, genuine, they're people too. Absolutely genuine. But they don't have the leverage to move unless they've got that signal from the community and unless they have that evidence from the community. Now, sure, we need epidemiological studies to say, yeah, that the Amish who've been living on food in this thing don't have the same cancer rates in these self-induced diseases as other communities. We've done those. CSIRO, where I used to work in the 1970s, had a division of human nutrition. And we took all these diseases, all these disease conditions, cancers, cardiac thing, and instead of taking them at a national actuarial number, which is for the life insurance industry, what's the odds of gambling on this person living or dying, we disaggregated them, right? And here's all the disease statistics, and we mapped them in terms of locality, diet, genetic origin, ethnic, patterns and stuff like that. And, excuse the pun, it stood out like dog's balls, right? Because basically the association of different diseases, okay? The Asian population with their fermented soy sauce, hey, they had esophageal cancers, right? Nobody else had esophageal cancers. But we knew that association between these fermented soy products, the Italians with their fermented salami, yeah, they had these categories of colon cancers, right? And do you understand? We were able to sort of map disease incidence back to diet and back to lifestyle. Yeah, 85 to 95%, associations. This associations, of course, this is epidemiology. But then there's enough clinical studies like the peroxidase that confirm here's the biochemistry behind that. And of course that really then was pretty radical, because we were now starting to point the finger to say, hang on, these self-induced diseases relate to particular factors, and that relates to particular liability. And the government had approved these practices, obviously. And when a government approves a practice, it transfers liability to itself, because the firm says, oh, it's approved. Therefore, the taxpayer wears it. And so we were, again, I don't know, I'll say it. We were then in this very difficult position where basically there were class actions against the government, and I was working for the government, and we were then called in as expert witness for the class action. And that's very unhealthy for governments, because, hang on, how can they win that one? And they could, you see, and what they did is they closed down the division of human nutrition and took all the data back to actuarial statistics. So now we have an Australian average esophageal cancer spread over 24 million people. Good, isn't it? It works well.
Efficiency at work.
Okay, but the point is, making your point, no, the government, the policy people aren't bad people. Absolutely, we reinforce and must keep on reinforcing. We've got to lead the change. Okay, it's we, and it's concerned consumer, it's every parent, it's every grandparent knows intuitively, hey, I've invested everything in my children, what am I going to feed them on, right? And if I have a choice and if I have the information, the education to say, look, here are alternative choices, I can empower myself. And the other question to your, other part of your answer to your question is, we can't just do that, because quite frankly, as we said, there's a $10 trillion multinational corporate food industry here, right? And we haven't got the supply, and no, that's the food industry, 10 trillion, and double that when you look at the medical or the disease pharmaceutical industry. But what I'm saying, our supply capacity is nothing like that, right? Okay, so we've got to foster these demand drivers of committed, concerned people, and we've got to foster the supply response to the demand drivers.
And if you get this net zero thing really singing.
Yes.
Then
Yes.
the rhizobia are going to win.
Yes.
And,
Yes.
and we're in fact going
Yes.
to get
Yes.
the side effect of healthy food.
Yes, and if we get the externality costs of our health consequences onto the balance sheet, when people realize that this is costing them $10 trillion a year in disease industry, but also their life, that's an externality that becomes compelling.
I just want to add, the China study, for example, did that kind of study that you were
Yeah.
explaining and really disaggregated a lot of the diseases and looked at
Yeah.
localities. And basically, a lot of the data were collected before T. Colin Campbell went to continue the study. And so they had a nice long-term look at people in different areas and seeing how people, when they moved to more concentrated cities where they started adopting less of a cultural lifestyle where you were eating whole foods, and very small amounts of meat instead of the huge amount of consumption of meat that people essentially do once they get more money because then they can afford it. And then again, I don't think people were doing the kinds of grazing. Where's Wayne? So that might again have a more concentrated level of nutrients.
Yeah.
He presents this information back, and he was serving on the dietary guidelines committees, and it gets knocked down because of the food industry lobbyists.
Yeah.
And it doesn't get into our public
Yeah.
psyche. But I just wanted to add one other thing in terms of voting with our dollars. We can see the rise in the availability of organic foods. We are voting with our dollars, and we have begun to do that. So the more we get involved in that, the more we'll see more of that.
But okay, but again, it's not always easy, but I agree with you totally, but David might add to this one. You see, what we're really now talking about, how to differentiate how the food is grown, right? Is it grown with these natural, symbiotic processes and quality control, safeguards and mechanisms, right?
The organic doesn't do it by
Well,
itself.
precisely, that's the point. See, the organic has sort of said, no, we don't want fertilizer and we don't want these biocides, right? And David's, of course, at the thick of this and leading on our behalf in this. The point is, you see, so organic has sort of said, okay, I need a checklist. The USDA has then, sort of brought that in and say, I will run the certification standards, etc. And I say, I won't have fertilizer, I won't have biocides, but it doesn't change how the food is grown. Because if there's now the challenge to say, look, I will have hydroponic glasses run by robots growing lettuces in 24 days, does that meet this requirement? You see? It's because it depends on what's in here. But we don't have any angle on that whatsoever. Has it got these micronutrients? No, all we've got is, hey, it's robots, it's hydroponics, it's mass glass houses, but it's sort of somehow ticked 2 boxes on a piece of paper.
So how do we label mycorrhizal?
No. Well, okay, do we want to label that? Okay, no, this is where we got to get smart. See, no, we don't want to say here's mycorrhizal because, hang on, then I've sprinkled on some mycorrhizal dust and, once you sprinkle on the dust, she's apples, mate, she's apples. Okay? No, I think it's you're in charge of your integrity, you're in charge of your health, your life, and you've got to say, look, how do I discriminate where it's grown? And have I got a farmer nearby where I know that farmer's conscious and is growing, on values and principles, how they grow their food, and you have that confidence in that integrity, that localization. Okay, so it's not, I'm not saying here put a gold star on somebody's forehead and then you're there. Oh, hang on, Peter, yeah. But then,
if we don't have already, there's a food analysis forum on Atlas BioWork. So the infrastructure or the platform or the framework for extreme, as Marlene said, disaggregation, or Marilyn said, disaggregation do we want to leave that in the hands of the corporations and the government? It doesn't work that way. It has to be
We have to, yeah.
disaggregate from the bottom up.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
this is where Atlas Biowork can help. We have if not today, tomorrow, there'll be a food analysis form on that. It's tied to place.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
grounded, not in.
And
not in
place
close-
and farmer, that we know that farmer has that integrity, and hey, we can have confidence in that farmer's and that place integrity, yeah.
Right, because
But-
the way,
yeah.
the way that the nutrient analysis is now is you can look up, on your, Fitbit or whatever, how much vitamin C does a lemon have, and it's totally random which
Precisely,
lemon they
precisely.
chose
Yeah.
for that.
And-
And just one other thing that I just want to jump in with was that in the United States, because we don't have a national health care plan,
Mhm.
the costs of that 10 billion,
Yeah.
$10
Yeah.
billion or
Trillion, yeah, yeah.
$1 trillion is it's indirect. It's not felt as directly by the policymakers.
No, I appreciate
because
it.
it's
Huh?
spread out.
Exactly, it's
And
externalized by
whereas you
them.
said that in Australia,
It-
the interest in this was greater because they have a
Yeah.
national health care plan.
Yeah.
So those costs, they're paying them
Yeah.
right out of the
Yeah.
same
Yeah.
budget line.
Totally.
So-
See, I mean, so from Elizabeth's point of view, if I go to our treasurer and I say, look, we run a $150 billion dollars a year disease industry, at the moment, so we're not as good as you guys. But if I go to our treasurer and say, look, do you want $80 billion a year saving? Hey, he listens. You see? Because $80 billion a year means something to politics and the budget. Because, as you said, we haven't externalized that liability. And in Australia, in America too, a lot of that, of course, a lot of people can't afford the health care that are coming. They just die earlier, right? That's hard. David.
I love the policy conversation, but I have a question about the biology here. I'm curious about if you took everything up in the industrial thing and
Yeah.
added it to a soil that
Yeah.
that had that 24,000 kilometers. In other words,
Yep.
would you, for a short period, is carbon the key, or are these toxins the key? And are they killing the mycorrhizal fungi by using the fertilizers and the biocides? Or,
Yeah.
or is it the lack of carbon, or it's probably both?
It's exactly that, David. It's a combination, but your question is very important. Nobody's trying to sort of demonize anything, right? If we have to cultivate to get rid of allelopathy or something like that, or reoxygenated soil, of course we can cultivate, right? As we said, like Jan sort of said, things were living even when we're cultivating in medieval times, right? And it's a matter of the extent and the degree. The same as putting water on and what have you, it's not the issue. I think it's what we talked about yesterday, what Peter talks about, what are the processes of soil health, and as long as we keep that in the forefront, that healthy sponge, well-structured soil, remember those nutritional paramounts, fixation, solubilization, access, uptake, cycling, as long as those processes are still operating, we don't beat ourselves up, I must be here, or I mustn't do that, or I mustn't do that, right? As a general rule, though, biocides, yes, I would think there's really very little room for that. But then you do exactly what you're doing, David. You say, no, I don't need biocides. I've got parasitic wasps. I've got companion planting. I've got rotational planting, right? I can achieve everything I delude myself I can achieve with biocides through good ecology, right?
Right. What about fertilizers? I'm just curious.
Okay, fertilizers too. See, again, I fertilize wonderful things because, two stories here. Okay, first of all, if you haven't got phosphorus, if you haven't got zinc, you haven't got plants, you're desert. So you need phosphorus. Now the question is, do you put it on in what form? If I put it on as slow release rock phosphate, where these guys are solubilizing what they need, hey, it's fantastic, right? So there's nothing wrong with fertilizers, it's just our mentality of, again, apologize, Elizabeth, moron agriculture, M-O-R-E-O-N, but don't get it wrong when you write down the notes. Okay, good. Okay, yeah. Don't quote me on the other one, right? I won't be able to get out of this country. Okay, so that's the first thing, like, yes, nothing wrong with intelligent use of nutrients, right? Nothing. Now, the bigger other thing, and this is actually opens the debate again beautifully. Okay, we've got 7.4 billion people. We're looking to 10 billion people. 80% of them will be in these cities, these urban concentration camps. And they're extremely vulnerable because all the nutrients are coming in, and that's a seedbed for pandemics and pollution. On the contrary, all those farms that are being mined of those nutrients, and they're running out of those nutrients. So the cities are really a sink for nutrients that is going to blow back on them dangerously if we don't manage it well. So what we've got to do is we've got to take those nutrients from the cities, from the effluent from the cities, harvest them in a clean, safe way with minimal weight, transport them back to the farmland so they can get redistributed. So not just cycling within the soil that we've been talking about, now we have to cycle between the cities and rural lands. There's absolutely elegant, cheap, profitable technologies for doing that, for taking essential nutrients from the cities, harvesting them from the effluents, waste, avoiding all your pollution, avoiding your pandemics, and taking 1% of the weight, but 90% of the nutrients back to the land to be redistributed naturally on the land. And we can do that. And so that's the sort of technology that's available, highly profitable, but we've just got to start saying, hey, we need it, and removing the externalities that are currently impeding that. Peter.
So, Walter, you've touched on a profound subject in human civilization and life,
Yeah.
which is the movement of shit.
Yeah.
And I really would like you to say at least a half a dozen other words.
Half a dozen other words? I don't shut up. I don't shut up.
Are we mining these with plants? Are we doing
Okay, well, let me tell you what we do. Because in a sense, it's Peter, you're the one that should be saying this, but in a sense, it's what John Todd has been doing for 40 years with his living machines, right? And so we basically have effluents, and I'm just coming down now technically what we do and how it works, and it's so simple. Okay, so we have effluent from households and stuff like that, and we can put a biodigester there, and we can basically put out methane to heat our houses and what have you, right? And we do that because this biodigester is a primary bacteriological, cleaning. It's more or less a controlled high-tech septic tank, right? And it's doing that. And so then we get the overflow from that, and we put them, what we call in Australia, a biodome. It's in a sense a living machine, but it's up a couple of notches, right? And all it is an above ground swimming pool. You've got them here too, haven't you? Just a plastic sheet in a frame. And what we've got is these above ground swimming pools, and of course they've got baffles in them. And they've got a glass house on top of them. And here we're growing our aquatic plants, and again that depends on where you are and what have you. Your Phragmites, your bulrushes, and your whatever, And the whole point is that there's your effluent, and your effluent is basically moving through this system, and it's moving through past the roots of these plants, and they're just massive microbial rhizosphere, colonies. So you're moving this effluent past all these, these rhizosphere colonies. And as we've been talking about all day, these are breaking down all the nutrients and harvesting all the nutrients, so this becomes actually a nutrient-rich substrate, right? They're all pumping, harvesting nutrients. Out of here, you get what we call functional water. Don't drink it. You can, it's no problems, you can. But basically, you use that for subsoil trickle irrigation, your urban agriculture, all the, that reuse of the water. But what we've got is in these grasshouses, we've just got a gantry, and every 8 days, 5 days, depending how fast they grow, we just run a hedge cut along that, right? And we harvest this biomass. We dry that biomass into stock feed pellets. Okay, and then we go to Bain and sort of say, hang on, Bain, if I gave you a high nutrient integrity, density, dry stock feed pellet that you can give at a 5% supplementation to get your animals to eat stubble and other, winter rough stuff, and then they're eating 5%, and then of course they're distributing that back throughout the field in their dung, would you be interested?
Yes, sir. What's the cost?
See? And I'm saying, hang on, no, you've invested this as negative cost because they're paying you for this effluent management, right? Okay? You own 30% of this business. You're in. Okay? So there you are. So now we've got nutrients, effluent, we've bacteriologically controlled it, we've captured some energy, we've basically bacteriologically, controlled it again, we've harvested all the essential nutrients, we've put that in dry stock feed pellets. Not only are we giving him food, but that high nutrient stock feed allows Bain to use that stubble and that rough stuff in winter and stuff at probably 400, 500% efficiency, palatability, protein conversion efficiency. Those pigs that you had, they'd go for that, wouldn't they? Exactly. Now, hang on, we haven't finished there. Australia's slow. Okay, here we've got evaporation coming off all the time. So actually here we collect potable water, recondensed potable water. So we end up with 60% functional water, 40% potable. You don't want to drink it because it's too sterile. But you put it into a clay dam and there's your water supply. You then build up obviously roots and some humate sludges here, and every so often you take that out and you feed that to worms, right? And you turn that into protein, and you can feed that to chicken or fish, and you eat those, and then you turn that into biofertilizer as well, right? Because you've got the casting, where have I got the worms? There, worms, and I've got biofertilizer, because there's all your castings and stuff like that. Bain, would you like some biofertilizer? Pelleted dry worm extracts. You own the business already, so hey. See, and so what I'm saying is, hey, here it is, here's urban effluent, here's every town of 20 houses or 200 houses. It's what these things are an overground, or we're using now containers, shipping containers, cut them horizontally in half, flip them over, put a glass house on them, put a plastic bag inside, boom.
And how much does that cost, Walter?
Well, how much can you knock off shipping containers in the middle of the night?
Okay, this is great, and I think...
2 words, is it too much?
No, it's not too much. It's very elegant and lovely, and the piece in there that I want to focus in on is the blue, the EFF, the effluent. We live in a primitive country here, and we mix all the garbage and crap and effluent.
Okay, very,
manufacturing, chemical, residential, it's all
very important.
pharmaceutical, it's a mess.
Thank you very much. A very important point, and that's in a sense why we've designed this in, because we have a biosensor there. If you put bad stuff in this, like if somebody's chemical stuff, then you'll end up with hydrogen sulfide and other sort of VOCs, and we have a biosensor and a shut-off valve. So basically, if anybody perverts this, we immediately shut it off below their kitchen window, right? And that's called a feedback loop, right? But basically we've got a shut-off valve, we've got a telemetry, and then you go back and say, warning sign, okay, and so somebody has to come out and say, hey, what's gone wrong? But you avoided the contamination of this whole system, right?
And then accompanying that then is education.
Oh, yeah, and with that, yeah. And also you then, look, it's a regional eco-business. You run that thing and you just contract their effluent management, right? So you're basically parking one of these. These are wheelie bins, your plastic wheelie bins, fitted out. So you park it under their kitchen window, connect it up, and you run this whole thing on contract. Okay, so next question.
I was saying, so a parallel stream with the fertilizers going out to the rural areas as money and people.
Yep.
I would suggest.
All of these things are money, right? I mean, I don't want to be money,
No, I'm
right?
just saying, like, instead of worrying about 80% of people living in cities, why don't we put some money and that'll pull the people out, and then you don't have to move the crap around as much.
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, look, this is really revitalizing communities, villages, regions, because, I'm with you, because now you're saying, okay, I'm running all these eco businesses, all these local employment opportunities, and with that, people with that local regional multipliers. So if you want to do the economic analysis on this, we don't want to leave it all to Bain, He's rich enough already.
How are you aggregating multiple houses?
Oh, very simple, because you put this basically under each house, but this effluent line here is just a 20 millimeter, an inch continuous plastic pipe, because you don't have to move solids in that, right? All the solids are being digested here, and this just, and quality control assurance. And then you're basically saying, look, it depends your configuration, but you might say, I'll move 40 houses through these pipes and you'll have a holding tank and stuff, right? But you understand, and then you say how many of these containers, and of course you can park them where you park your cars, right? You have these biodomes sitting in car parking lots in suburban streets or on the nature strip, all green, and you paint them, if you like, paint flowers on them.
So the scale of this is a lot less than I would have thought. I mean, you're not talking about, sort of sewage plant.
Oh, no.
In the train when you go down the Hudson River.
No. Look, this is really, I don't want to talk anarchy, but no, look, 95% of the cost of our waste management is the concrete infrastructure, civil engineering, the pipes and the pumps and and this is, this is just grassroots cycling at the village level, at every town, at every suburb, every cluster, and then back into farmland,
This is my question, do you have to split the waste stream?
Do I?
Have to split the waste stream? Between liquid and solid waste?
Well, look, there's a combination. You can do it either way. You don't want to flood this with too much water, but if you have a lot of liquid waste, laundries and stuff, you can put it through you'd put a separate biodome with a faster flow rate designed for that, rather than leaching out that process.
In the house, is there change to the toilet?
No. You get gold taps and diamond toilet seats,
Can you quote a quick number that says something about capital intensity on this?
Capital intensity on this system?
Yeah, right.
Oh, well, depending. We design, but no, you can put $20,000 a cluster unit.
So
to take a wheelie bin and fit it out might be in cost, like actually technology costs $100, and one of these is a couple of grand, right?